Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to OTMT. Is that
Oh, that's good. No, keep going. I'm enjoying that.
In the left corner, the inventor of Service Worker and any app with a checkered background, Jake Archibald.
And in the right corner, the inventor of what is it?
Nothing notable.
I think you'll find structured clone API. I mean, yeah. It's Surma, the Surma.
Woo! Woo! The crowd goes wild.
Amazing. Right, well, okay. That's us lost all credibility.
Yeah. The minuscule amounts that we had, maybe.
Yeah. Don't know if I'll put this in the show or not. We'll see where it goes. Can I tell you about the stupidest thing I ever did in my life?
I mean, of course, I thought I would know this, but now I'm...
You might.
Well, tell me, Jake.
So I went drinking with an old school friend at London Bridge. And then we I'll keep this short. We went to get the train back home. As we were walking towards the train, I don't know. He somehow he caught the back of my foot as he was walking. I tripped up and my shoe flew off my foot. And in a shot that I couldn't do deliberately if you gave me a million tries, my shoe flew through the air and went between the train and the platform, just straight onto the ground.
Please mind the gap between the train and the platform edge.
Yeah. And I looked at my shoeless foot. I looked at my friend who was laughing a lot. And then it's like, what happens now then? What do we do? And here's where it gets stupid. I looked at the train board and saw that train was not leaving for 15 minutes. So I went down onto the tracks and got my shoe.
You went into the gap?
Well, I suggested, so I said, well, I could just reach down and get it. But it was a little bit far, so I suggested that he holds my ankles. And, but he found this whole thing so funny, he just dropped me.
And now you were under the train.
Now I was under the train.
That does seem slightly terrifying.
And then I emerged from under the train with my shoe. And and at the time, this all seemed like a very sensible thing to do. But it is.
Isn't the electricity under there as well?
Maybe. This is why it's stupid, isn't it? This is why it was a very stupid thing to do. I just, it's one of those things of I met up with Frances Berryman, who I worked with at the BBC and have known for a very long time. And whenever I meet her with her, at some point she'll go, "Remember that time you went under a train, you idiot?" And it's like, oh yeah, I think I'm actually quite lucky to be alive.
Yeah.
And not in one of those Darwin Award entries, but
considering that on an airplane now they tell you if you drop your phone, please call a member of staff and don't move your chair because you'll just break everything. So this seems like you really should have gone to train people and tell them, my shoe.
That is the correct thing to. Yeah. Hello, I dropped my shoe under a train. Can I have it back, please? And yeah, no, that is the right thing to do. I think I weirdly was embarrassed about it, and decided that risking my life would be the better thing to do, which it absolutely wasn't. But rest assured that if I dropped my shoe out of a plane, I think I would just write it off.
I mean, if there was any cavity that allowed you to.
Well, I don't know. It could be a Boeing, right?
Accidentally hit the catapult, the ejector seat.
I'm terrified now to press that button to recline the seat in case just
it's right next to the eject button.
Part of the plane just ejects. Yeah. Should we talk about the web?
Let's talk about the web, Jake.
Right. Oh, I suppose I will say thank you to Shopify for just letting this happen. Whether you think that's a good thing or not, that's for you to decide.
Yeah, the way you say it, it's like they're kind of like, this must happen, but I will look away. I will not dignify this.
It's pretty much how it goes. Okay, so what I want to talk about is putting React in the browser.
Ooh.
And it starts with a tweet from Michael Jackson, who is on the remix team.
Ah, that one. Okay.
And yes, just to clarify, the tweet is this: yesterday at a company. This is not my Michael Jackson voice. I'm just doing a vaguely other person voice. Yesterday at a company offsite, I was in a conversation with Yoav Weiss and Jaffa the Cake, where we discussed a potential. Yes, that's me. Yeah, we discussed a potential element.replace HTML API, and I can't stop thinking about it. Think efficient DOM updating that doesn't lose state, like Focus, built right into the browser. Could be super powerful and something frameworks like React could leverage internally. All right, so this API, it's kind of like inner HTML, but it'll do different.
It'll do smart.
So it'll
do it smart.
Yeah, it'll change as little of the structure as possible in order to achieve the kind of markup pattern that you've given it.
My gut reaction to this is that is actually kind of cool, because it is kind of the primitive behind it. Even if you were to write your app by hand with JavaScript, like that's something you do. You want to update a piece of DOM.
Exactly. And there was a lot of positive sentiment in the replies about how this will improve performance and it will reduce the size of React, and or you wouldn't need frameworks at all for some simple cases.
Just gonna interject again. This reminds me of because we had there was similarly an exploration before many years ago now about what is a low-level primitive we could build into the browser that helps frameworks like React, but also others. And wasn't that like template tag instantiation with like...
Oh boy, we are going to get onto that.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, okay. Hang on to that for quite a while. Because I stormed into this, Twitter thread, and obviously I was tagged in it, but to kind of really just pour misery on the whole thing, as I do. But I didn't really have enough time, space, whatever, to kind of add detail why I didn't think that this API is a good idea. So, hey, I thought I'd do it on the podcast. So, why are modern frameworks good? Or why is the DX, the developer experience, good? I think it comes down to the DOM is this big old bag of state. And if you're changing the DOM, you're running commands like, remove this element, add it over here, change this attribute, add this event listener, remove this other one. You're manually going from state A to B in a series of steps, and there is a lot of room for error. Whereas modern frameworks, via some kind of templating system like JSX in React, they let you describe state B, and the framework goes and does the minimum it can figure out that makes the DOM into that shape, right? So why isn't replace HTML that? Like, why isn't it ticking that box? And the problem here is HTML. Like, HTML is the serialized form of the DOM, but boy, is it lossy.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's it got? Like tag names, attributes, text nodes, child nodes, string values. Like, attributes can only be strings because it's a serialized string format. But there is a lot of state in the DOM that isn't captured by that, like event listeners.
I guess I should clarify the replace HTML API that Michael Jackson was kind of suggesting there would take a string of markup, right?
Yes, exactly.
Which is where this lossiness that a stringified HTML cannot represent full state of a DOM tree entirely or fully.
Yeah, you're not getting the listeners, you're not getting properties, you're not getting like the pixels on a canvas, right? It's just not there in the markup. And that's why I don't think it works. So like if React tried to adopt this thing, like they would have to add in an extra layer to handle. Well, let's just talk about event listeners first. So they would need some way of knowing that an element was replaced when they expect it to have the same listener as the previous version of that element, so that they could go and re-add the listener, or like remove it if it's not supposed to have that listener anymore, or like, so you would need a bunch of metadata coming back out. And my gut feeling is it's not worth it at that point. You would be adding so much code to do that.
Also, yeah, I guess React and I guess other frameworks as well already have this DOM-like data structure, like objects with children, which probably resemble, for many intents and purposes, the DOM tree. So then serializing it to a string so that the browser can reparse it.
Exactly.
Probably quite wasteful. I think the goal here, like, let me give you a new DOM tree or representation of a DOM tree and you figure out what actually needs to change. I think that goal is viable. I think HTML strings might just be the wrong vessel to transport the information.
Yeah, agreed. And Preact is doing all of this already in 3K. So, like...
Gotta have to weave that one in there.
Yeah, I know React is bigger, sure, but we're not going to be shifting the needle much in terms of download size if we put all of this in the browser,
Yeah.
On the performance side, I'm guessing, but I feel like, and I used to make this mistake a lot, I used to think if you took something that was written in JavaScript and just put it in the browser, it would be like 3 times as fast or whatever. It would take an 1/8 of the time or a 10th of the time or something. And I just don't think that's true in most cases, especially stuff that's doing a lot of DOM stuff.
Yeah, like JavaScript engines are just phenomenally good at running JavaScript. I did a
absolutely
blog post a while ago, which I'm totally going to link now, where I was, and it's not completely apples and apples because it's really hard to do, but I was implementing a algorithm or something in WebAssembly, like in AssemblyScript, in C, and in Rust, and in JavaScript.
Was this image rotating or something else? No, it's a different thing.
No, this was a similar exploration with the rotation where we thought WebAssembly would solve it, but actually most of the performance gains came from thinking about browser caches. No, this one, I'm now doing the live clicking. Where is it? Is WebAssembly Magic Performance Pixie Dust? I was blurring. So you have, pixels of an image in an array, and you want to run Gaussian blur on it to blur the image. And basically, in the end, it took some... By default, JavaScript was just beating all of the WebAssembly. Like naively written JavaScript beat all of the naively written compiled languages.
Oh, very good.
In the end, with like getting really deep and doing handcrafted optimizations, I could get most of the compiled languages to be close to JavaScript. C++ actually beat it in the end after I got help from good C++ developers. But JavaScript just, me shitting some JavaScript on the floor ran really, really fast. Of course, there's then also the file size to consider. So JavaScript was just like, in the end, a really good trade-off. And I guess it makes sense because JavaScript is fairly high level, which means the engine gets a lot of high-level type information while it's running it through the interpreter to collect how to compile it. While, at WebAssembly, you lose all that information about, like, is this a float array? Is it an image? What are the access patterns? Like, in that sense, JavaScript, the language, can encode a lot more that the compiler can use than low-level WebAssembly. But yeah, like, JavaScript is just very, very well optimized.
Exactly. Yeah, it can adapt at runtime, which is great for things that are running in a tight loop, which that kind of code is. Yeah, I agree. I don't think it would be improving performance much, if at all. Especially when you have to add the extra stuff on top to make listeners work, you're probably losing. And we haven't even considered things like component references, which all the frameworks have, and you can't represent in this like replace HTML world so easily. So, why doesn't React have this problem? Like, why is this totally fine in Preact, React, Vue, Svelte, all of that sort of stuff? And it's because of this templating language they use. So in React, it's JSX. Mm-hmm. It looks like HTML, but it is not, because it's able to express event listeners. It's able to express property values.
I mean, it just compiles down to an object notation, right? Like, it's just... Yes,
exactly. And in fact, I think most of these frameworks don't surface a difference between attributes and properties. They just sort of, you look like you're writing an attribute, but you're probably using a property in most cases. But it will decide internally which to use. And I think it's produced a generation of web developers that do not know the difference between attributes and properties. And
yeah.
But I don't know. I think that's fine, right? It's great that people don't have to worry about that. But if you're thinking about putting React in the browser, you have to think about that, right? This is something we have to consider. So for people, like, if you're unsure of the difference, attributes, they're the things that appear on the element in the elements panel in DevTools and in the HTML source, like ID equals foo or whatever. Whereas properties are the ones on the DOM instance, so like .text content or .inner HTML on the element. Like, those are properties, not attributes. And since they're on an instance, they don't have to be strings, so you can have like .class list, which is an object with methods and stuff. You've got .offset height, which is a number. You've got .value as date, which is a date on date inputs. The reason I think people get confused is there's a lot of attributes that have equivalent properties. So .id is the same as the attribute. In fact, it is just reading from the attribute and writing to it, which the spec calls reflection.
Oh, ID is reflected?
ID is reflected. Yep, absolutely.
I was trying to remember because that's something where I think I looked it up once and kind of didn't really memorize it because I don't interact with this enough. But I remember that Rob Dodson at the time was trying to write a guide for custom elements. Where is your source of truth? Like, do you write getter setter properties that read from the attribute? Do you have an actual property that just reflects back to the attribute? And then, the web platform is also, I think, somewhat inconsistent. Like, for example, .value on an input field does not get reflected to the attribute. And I think once you set the property, changing the attribute does nothing, maybe? Isn't there something weird like that as well?
Oh, let's talk about that. Yes. This is where it gets confusing, is we have cases where there is reflection, but the names are different. So you've got a class attribute, but a class name property, and it is just reflection between the two, but they've got different names. But yes, the maddest one is form fields and value. Okay. Because in React, you look like you're just setting the value attribute, like in JSX or whatever, but you are not. I'm trying to think of the best way to describe this. This is going to sound...
I mean, it gets already weird when you think about that there is an input field with type file, where, right? Like that. Yes. How what does it look like on an attribute? It just doesn't. It doesn't happen.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yes. So, value is a property that doesn't have an equivalent attribute, and you can confirm this because if you write to .value with JavaScript and look at DevTools, it hasn't updated any attribute. If you type into a text field, you won't see an attribute getting updated. In DevTools, that's proof of that. But here's the thing: there is a value attribute. The value attribute is linked to the default value property. So .default value reflects or reads from the value attribute in the same way like class name and class are linked. And that sets the default value of the property. So if you have the attribute, value equals foo, or you do like .default value equals foo, that's the default value for that field. And if you read .value initially, that's what you'll get back. Even if you update default value, your .value will return the default if it's in default mode. But then as soon as the value is set, either by doing .value equals whatever, or the user interacts with the field, it switches mode and it's now no longer doing the default thing. It's doing the actual set value thing, like whatever the user's input. Look, no wonder people don't know the difference between this stuff. It's that's it.
That's madness. Absolute madness.
I know. So diffing works because React has this format which can represent listeners and properties and non-string values and all of this. There are still gaps, like it can't represent the pixels and the canvas elements. So if you're using canvas in React, you have to be careful because if you hit a diffing path where it doesn't realize that you've moved that canvas somewhere, it will end up removing one canvas and recreating another, and you lose all the pixel data. But that's
I mean, in general, any web elements, be that custom elements or native ones, that have internal state outside of the React state, they start messing up when they get recreated and stuff and not just updated.
Exactly.
Video players as well, right? That's the infamous one where a video starts replaying from the start because React did a re-render and for some reason recreated the DOM element rather than not touching it.
Yeah, absolutely. Iframes as well. Yeah, exactly. So, but to do this properly, you would need this declarative format, right? You would need something like JSX that can represent all of this stuff. But this is something that frameworks don't agree on. So if we just put JSX in the browser, is Vue going to drop their current templating language and use JSX instead? Is Svelte going to drop their templating language and use JSX instead? I don't know. But I suspect maybe not.
I mean, I guess for me, the idea would have been that whatever this API takes is an intermediate format that each framework can target with their own templating shenanigans.
Yes, I agree. And so to get a feel for how that is actually successful, we can take a step back and 20 years ago or so, developers were asking browser DevRels to just put jQuery in the browser.
Yeah,
right.
Put it in the browser.
Just put it in the browser. And that didn't happen, but some stuff did happen. Like you say, some kind of intermediary, lower level stuff was put in to help jQuery do its job faster and better. And also, so I'll get into the details. Query selector all, we got that. Because the selector engine was a heavy part of jQuery. It was even its own project in the end called Sizzle. A whole new implementation of selector matching, parsing and matching. But the browser should have this feature built in because it already has most of it there for CSS. It already has the selector parser, it already has the means to select elements based on a selector. So it just had to expose it via JavaScript, and it's kind of stupid that it took so long for that to happen. The name of it sucks. It's a thing we use all the time. It's long to write out, but we got there in the end. We also got things like element.after, element.before, and element.replace with, I think was another. A few of these methods which they were just added for convenience. They didn't perform better than the jQuery equivalents, but they made the platform nicer to use. And then we got things like CSS animations, web animations, request animation frame, because jQuery had some animations built in. And this was better for the browser to do because it has access to things like vsync.
I was going to ask, in jQuery providing a request animation frame, was that the infamous set timeout 16?
Yes, it was.
Brilliant.
Because they couldn't do anything better.
Yeah, of course.
There's literally nothing. And so as soon as request animation frame became a thing, they switched to that, although, a series of compatibility issues because set timeout would run when the web page wasn't shown. Whereas request animation frame would pause. So it was a compat issue for them to adopt it, but I think they eventually did anyway. But you also get for the declarative animations, some of them can run on the compositor and be much faster, and that's not something jQuery could have just done. So what is the equivalent for React and the current generation of frameworks? This kind of lower level thing that you alluded to. And it's something that browsers have been looking at for years. And one of which you mentioned right at the start of the topic was HTML template instantiation, which was a joint idea between Apple and Google 7 years ago.
7 years ago.
I know. I remember hearing about it at TPAC, which is the W3C meetup.
That's where I heard about it as well. It must have been my first TPAC then.
Yes, it was. Yes, you were there for that one as well. Yeah, I remember. But yeah, it didn't go anywhere really beyond the doc. But there is a more recent proposal. It's still 4 years ago, but there was some more exploration done last year. So it is it's not dead. It might be resting.
It's being looked into.
It's being looked into. Absolutely. Okay, DOM parts. What are they? This seems like a pretty neat idea. It's essentially placeholders. So there's an attribute one, a DOM node one, and a child list, set of nodes, I guess. One, you put one of these placeholders in the DOM, and then you can update its value via the placeholder object. So instead of setting an attribute to a string, you set it to one of these placeholders, and now you've got that kind of way of updating it. And same for nodes and stuff as well. There's also a grouping primitive, so you can group a lot of these placeholders together and update their values together, which gives you DOM batching, which removes that like bouncing between the DOM and JavaScript. You can kind of, in JavaScript say, I want this, 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 and this to happen, and then, stage it and commit it.
So this sounds a bit like what at the time Lit and Lit HTML and similar projects were trying to do, where they not just took your JSX or markup-ish looking thing and diffed it against the current DOM. They would rather figure out which parts of your markup are actually dynamic, like are bound to a variable, and remember those places, and just if the variable updates, it would go straight to that point in the DOM and just update it, and kind of avoid this whole diff approach as much as possible. And that's also kind of what I think preact signals are now doing, where when you pass a signal into an attribute or into the DOM, it doesn't do a whole VDOM diff if it can avoid it. It just goes straight to the thingy. So this seems like a platformization of that.
Yeah, it is. So with preact signals right now, like it only does the fast path for attributes. It doesn't do the fast path for
and for text nodes, right?
Oh, sorry, you are correct. And for text nodes, it doesn't do it for changing trees, but this DOM parts system would let you do it for trees as well. Lit does do this as well. It does it with, I think that the placeholders they use within the DOM tree is HTML comments. I think it's the nearest thing they can get to these little markers that they can put in. And so if you use Lit, if you go into DevTools and look at your thing, you'll see these little HTML comments dotted around the place, which is its kind of placeholder system. There is another part to the proposal. It's the DOM part declarative template. So this is a template element as already exists, but inside there, if you put, and this is going to be difficult to say with words, open curly, close curly, you can imagine what that looks like a sort of mustache.
Yeah, what can I say? It's handlebars, right?
Yes, but with nothing in it.
Yeah.
And that marks it as a part, it's kind of putting one of those little placeholders in. And then other than that, the details are kind of like, it's not clear how you would, instantiate this template, how you would then get the parts out of it in an order that's reliable. That kind of stuff is still unexplored, but
it feels like the obvious choice would be you put a name in between the handlebars, and you can reference the different parts by name.
Well, yeah, I'd have thought that, but that doesn't seem to be the current proposal. But I think that's a sensible way to do it. Like you can put some metadata in there that makes it, you can then query part by name or something, get part by name or whatever.
Well, you just get like a dot parts, which is a dictionary of name to part. Yeah.
Oh, that's even better. Yeah, you should do API design. I should stay away from it. But yeah, it's other than that, details light on the ground. But it does feel like this is a mid layer that a lot of the frameworks could benefit from, especially the batched DOM updates, if nothing else. Another API that I think is interesting here is there's a discussion around an API to move DOM nodes, and which sounds like, well, can't we already move DOM nodes?
I was going to say, we have append, and if it's already somewhere else, it gets moved.
But you already hit upon the problem of this, and you mentioned it earlier. What's the problem with that?
It loses state, maybe?
It does, and the reason it loses state is because it's when you append a node to somewhere else, it's actually removing the node, then inserting the node. It's not a kind of atomic
so
move.
Like in custom elements speak, you will literally see a disconnected callback and a connected callback?
Exactly. And that is like, again, God, I'm going to struggle to remember which elements this affects and which ones it doesn't. Like you can move a canvas around and it's fine. you cannot move an iframe around because the removal steps for an iframe is to unload the inner document.
Yeah,
So
I mean, Canvas actually, you literally can remove it from the DOM and you can wait a couple of frames and reinsert and it will have the same state. Like that's literally how the Canvas element works, I guess. Yeah, so video player, I guess.
exactly, you can use a canvas outside of the DOM. Video, I can't. Is the one I can't remember. Does that? I think because a video won't make noise when it's not in the DOM. So I think that is another one of the ones that will lose state when you're just moving around. Maybe
it even depends on the attributes. Maybe if it's autoplay, it resets. If it doesn't, it can maintain the state. Who knows?
Oh, I don't know. But anyway, this is the bit they're looking to fix as well.
Yeah.
And this will help. And I know this is something the frameworks have asked for, is that because it will help the case where they are wanting to rearrange. And it's not a problem unique to frameworks, but I know they want to be able to take an iframe and move it into a React portal kind of thing, and for it to survive. And we've had anyone who's implemented a video site where you want to take the video and pop it into a kind of picture-in-picture, kind of like in the corner of the page as you scroll down, you're in all kinds of trouble because it's the horrible things you have to do to your DOM when you actually just want to move that video element.
YouTube solved it.
Well, there you go. That's why they're so successful.
Well, they have some very interesting techniques. I don't know if it's still the case, but I remember at one time when they load the page, or when the page loads, they would what they called bless the video tags. So they would have multiple video tags that are in the DOM but not visible, and they would click play on them because it's in response to some form of user interaction, which is the only way you're allowed to like programmatically call play, and it actually has an effect. And that's what they would use for the autoplay feature, where they would then switch to the next video, change the source, and the video would start playing automatically because it had been blessed by a user interaction click.
Oh, interesting. And also, I think they use all of the lower level video stuff, right?
Media MSE and all those shenanigans. Yeah.
Yes, the media source extension stuff. Yeah. So I think that gets them out of trouble as well. But doing it just plain with a video element is a pain. So yeah, that's it. That's kind of where we're at, and that's why when people say it's like, well, let's just put this in the browser and be done with it. It's like I get grumpy and say this is not as simple as you think it is, and that's
no. But you said the discussion was like this was started 4 years ago. Is there still activity? Are these all dead? Are some of these still alive? Like, what is the?
There was some activity, 2023, so not dead, maybe resting. I guess what they need to do is make sure that this is of benefit to frameworks. Like, does this benefit React? Does this benefit Vue?
I feel like, the whole here is a primitive to kind of isolate slots from different DOM elements that you can grab directly. That seems quite good to me.
Yeah, I think so. I guess it would come down to how much work is it for React to translate its current model into that, and is it do they get a benefit that is worth it in the end?
I'd be really curious to know, like, for example, the Svelte folks who are already having this compilation step and putting a lot of powerful stuff into that step. If they would use it, if they would be interested, if they could basically, because you have your markup in a separate file, you have all the variables that are already reactive slotted into children or attributes and properties and all that jazz. If that for them would be like, yeah, cool, that's just a compilation target. We can adopt this in no time and would do exactly what we need.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing other frameworks would. I think it sounds useful, but I would be curious to get some people together from framework land and just weigh in on that.
Yeah, it does feel on the outside it looks much more closer to the lit model than the React model, but maybe the differences are smaller than we think. But the moving elements around thing that was pretty recent. I mean, it's been talked about for a long time, but the activity on that has been.
I'm actually surprised that is still not around because, the resetting and being able to move an element around without resetting its internal state seems like such an obvious thing to have.
Yeah, and you can hack it as well.
Maybe it's much harder to implement than I think it is. I don't know.
I think there's just a lot of spec work to be done, and because you can do it, like you can So you can have an element in the DOM that is slotted in a shadow root, and you can move the slot around.
Oh.
And that results in like the sort of de facto position of the iframe in the DOM changes, but the iframe itself hasn't been removed and reinserted.
It's almost like a document fragment kind of thing.
Yeah, so there are lots of cases where you can appear to move things around the DOM. Well, you are sort of moving them around the shadow DOM, but without causing a disconnect and reconnect. But yes, sort of doing that in a general case, like I think it's one of those things where you've got that big, massive HTML doc that you have to go through and make sure, dot all the I's and cross all the T's, and deal with all of the edge cases around it. Also, things like what happens with mutation observers, what happens with mutation events, because unfortunately, although they're deprecated, we still have to say what happens in that case. So I think it's just a lot of work, but it's definitely something we want on the platform.
I mean, well, I'm about to start rabbit holing now, but mutation observer seems quite obvious. If the element is observed directly, you keep going. If it was just indirectly observed via child list, then you get a remove event. Move on. Seems obvious. But you're right. There's all these things need to be spec'd, right? Like these are all the...
Well, but you're not though. This is the bit where it's tricky because you're literally like a mutation observer would tell you this element is being removed and then added somewhere else. But what we're talking about is something that is observably different to that. Like it's a move rather than a remove and an insert. And so maybe you just say, okay,
maybe it's a new observer event then. If it's a new type of DOM operation, it probably has to be.
Yeah, I think so. You either sort of slightly lie and say it's a remove and an insert, or you say it's a remove and an insert but add an extra little property on it to say but really
it was in fact a move.
It's an atomic. And I think that's the word they've been throwing around in the APIs, that it's a kind of atomic remove and insert. Yeah. But yeah, naming is the last problem to solve.
I mean, also now that you say that, adding a move could actually break certain custom elements, because if the assumption is so far, like let's say I don't know, well, you store a pointer to your parent is kind of stupid because you have that anyway. But let's say you memoized it and you kind of went, okay, I only need to invalidate that memoized value on a disconnect, and now the move prevents that disconnect callback from being called.
Exactly. Yes. So
web.
I use the connected callback to know that my parent chain has changed.
Yeah.
So,
or maybe connect without disconnect is the move pattern.
Well, I imagine you'll end up with connect being passed some kind of, and disconnect being passed this kind of atomic Boolean or something. But,
yeah.
Well, anyway, yeah. So that's where all the complication comes from. That's why, again, it's never as simple as you think. But
that's why you don't do standards, people.
Yeah, that's why I don't do it anymore. too much work.
And it takes 6 years.
It takes 6 years to get nowhere.
That's how long structured clone took.
Really?
Well, not like actively working on it, obviously, but from filing the issue to it being shipped in the first browser.
Yeah.
I think it was like 4 years of nothingness because people were like, yeah, we're interested, but nobody wants to do the work and it's not relevant enough. And then for some reason, a second wind came that now people want a structured clone again, and it got prioritized. And sometimes I think in this case, you just had to wait for the right time to come around to quickly be ready and then just push it through.
I think custom CSS easings, like using the linear function, was surprisingly fast.
Yeah, that was really quick.
But it depends where you measure it from, like, because people were asking for custom easing years and years ago, but the idea of like, well, let's have a function where it linear interpolates between a series of points to writing the spec to implementations being in browsers. But even then, it was still a couple of years, I think.
Yeah.
From start to finish. But
standards are definitely on the order of years. It's rarely below that.
Oh, well.
Speaking of our release cadence.
Yeah. Should we stop just because we're just nattering on about other stuff now, aren't we, really? I mean, I know that's literally the kind of name of the
I mean, that is the tagline, but yeah.
Should we go? I probably should do some actual work for Shopify. Thank
you, Shopify, for letting us call this work, kind of.
Yeah.
But yeah, because we are both off to Toronto. So
to do essentially standards work, but internally.
Yeah. So much for not doing standards anymore. Damn it.
Yeah, it's like chairing a working
can't
group.
let go.
Yeah. Well then, with that, all that's left to say is, happy next time.
Happy next time.
Bye.
Let's go further, not even tech of the main thread. I learned an amazing story about a Japanese marathon runner, which I just have to tell you. So this is, his name is Shizo Kanakuri. I hope I pronounced it halfway correctly. I'm sure Mariko will tell me.
It sounded convincing.
And he ran for Japan in the Olympics in 1912, which were hosted by Sweden in Stockholm. And at that,
okay, I'm enjoying this Wikipedia entry.
And at the time, I will actually, in fact, link to the Wikipedia entry to this because it is hilarious. A friend had sent this to me. So he, came from Japan at the time. Apparently, it takes 18 days to go from Japan to Stockholm with like boats and trains and stuff. And he arrived in Stockholm, and it was summer. It was hot. It was, in fact, midsummer. So when the white nights are happening, the sun doesn't really set. So he struggled to sleep after this long trip. He didn't really like or was able to eat the local food very much. And now he was supposed to run a marathon during a heat wave. And in fact, this Olympic event has already gone down in history because it's the first time a Olympic athlete died because a Portuguese runner just collapsed because of the heat wave. So Shizo, our friend, also noticed that he was struggling, and just before reaching the half point, he just said, I need to stop, because he was delirious at this point, and just stumbled into a random garden party that was apparently happening nearby, and just drank orange juice for an hour, hanging out with a Swedish family. And he was so embarrassed that he clearly was not gonna have any form of respectable time that he just decided to go home, and he didn't tell anyone. And the Olympic officials didn't know, and they filed him as a missing person. And that was kind of the end of it. Oh, by the way, this marathon competition, I think there were 96 people who started, and only, I think, 50 finished because so many had to drop out because of the heat wave. Anyway, decades later, a Swedish reporter stumbled over Shizo in Japan, working as a geography teacher. And I presume, after reporting back to Sweden that this guy is alive and, just going about his life, Sweden offered him to finish his marathon.
Amazing.
So he went back to Sweden.
And the finishing time still has to be from when he started, of course, right?
Yeah. So he went back and met the family whose garden party he crashed, or the son of the man who was hosting the garden party. And apparently the son told him, like, yeah, you gave my dad the scroll with Japanese writing, and it's kind of become like a treasured family heirloom because it's so beautiful, and and he gave that to them as a gift, as a thank you for hosting them and giving him orange juice. And he looked at it, and it was just a customs form that he apparently gave to them. So yeah, he then actually finished his marathon with an official time of 54 years, 8 months, 6 days, 5 hours, 32 minutes, 20 seconds, and 300 milliseconds, which to this day is the Guinness World Record for the longest marathon time. And I guess he's also the only marathon runner to, while he was finishing a marathon, got married, had 6 children, and 10 grandchildren. And I just think that's an absolutely amazing story.
I love that. Oh, yes. Yes. Link to the Wikipedia page for that. I want to read all of the extra details. That's excellent.